Okay, so today we are having an interview with Ezenwata Linda, who is joining us for talking about the African EU relationship and the EU relationship with the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. So I will introduce her. She's a national and Nigerian national who is a specialist in international affairs. She has worked across both African and European institutions, supporting regional diplomacy at the Economic Community of Western African States Commission, both in Lagos and now in its permanent representation to the EU in Brussels. She's also a member of Diaspora Vote, an NGO based in Brussels, where she supports BIPOC-led civic engagement across the EU. So, for starting our interview, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Global Gateway projects from the EU. Um, what do you think about who really decides where the funds go and who benefits from them?
Mm. When we look at the Global Gateway project, it's a 300 billion promise to the global South countries, and 100 billion is given to African countries. But it works in a different model. We have the Team Europe model. So the Team Europe model, it's it's a form of whereby the EU coordinates a different approach with different bodies. So we have the team player there who is the European Commission, that is the executive body that sets the policy, controls the funding of 100 billion euros out of 300 billion euros. Then we have the European Investment Bank, that is the EU Development Bank that provides the loans and the financing. Then we now have the developing agencies, the bilateral developing agencies like Germany, that's GIZ, France, that's Asian France. Then we have the Enabel, and the list goes on. So these agencies, they are the ones that actually coordinate under the Team Europe, but they also have their own agenda. Then we have the European private companies, which are the renewable energy, telecommunication, infrastructure firm. They also partner with they're also partners in the Global Gateway project because these are the private investors that have to come to Africa to actually invest to actually invest. So now when we look at how this, so how is the project now designed? So these companies, they come with a proposal, they pitch it to the African government, and they're like, okay, the Global Gateway, okay, this is what we have, which is okay. And this project is going to be financed by the Global Gateway money. And the African governments are like, okay, if they like it, fine. If they don't like it, fine. But at the end of the day, this project is being designed by the Europeans, and they are the ones coming to actually invest in our region. So at the long run, who decides? The European companies, the European institutions, the developing agencies, they are the ones who decide on the Global Gateway project. Then the African government, they have limited input when it comes to how these projects are being pre-designed. But that is a bit different between the West African region, let's say the Lagos-Abidjan Corridor, which is totally different. Because on the Lagos-Abidjan Corridor, the West African region, we are the ones that say, okay, we want a regional trade corridor. But that regional trade corridor is being funded by our own bank. That is the AFDB, this is the African Development Bank, is the one financing that project. So they are the ones financing the project. But in contrast, where we have the other developing agencies, so it's more of an identifying the project, the opportunities that African country needs, designing the project, providing technical assistance and training. But another thing with the developing agencies, when they come to the region and they are like, okay, we have to get technical assistance. When they bring their technical assistance from Europe, it's different from the amount they pay the technical assistance from Africa. But different qualification, I mean, the same qualification, the same experience, but different pay.
Great. So you mentioned the Lagos-Abidjan Corridor, and I wanted to ask you, what can the Global Gateway learn from this experience? Because, as you said, it's more African-led initiative, and mainly with the funding from the African Development Bank. So, what can the EU institutions learn from this experience?
I think what they can learn from this is because they are still having problems even in the Lagos-Abidjan Corridor because it's still what they can learn is they need to understand that Africans have our priorities. They need to understand that Africa needs to genuinely lead on what they want in their region. And they also need to understand that they can also provide their expertise, but we have to lead. We have to move upstream than downstream where we are always in our project. That is the only way it's going to work. If they always keep themselves upstream in our project, it's never going to work because different African countries all have their different priorities. And when it comes again on information gap, wherever they get their information from, they need to find a way to also have dialogue with the regional organizations of each African countries. Like information, okay, you get your information from the developing agencies, from the EEAS, and the list goes on like that. But when it comes to you, they also need to find a way, create a structure whereby there's going to be, I don't know, again, there's not even transparency because you put money, how is the money being spent? The EU complains to now that there's no transparency in the project.
Great. And you mentioned the importance of taking into consideration the African states' priorities. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think the role of African organizations such as the Economic Community of Western African States in these negotiations? How can they help the African states to make their priorities be considered in these development projects?
Um, One thing I would say is coming together with one voice. When you go and liaise as Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and the rest of them, it's never going to work. Now we need to come together and come with one voice. This is what we want, a unified bloc. We do it like a rec. We have ECOWAS, we have CEDEMA, we have other regional organizations that are there. So we need to come together as a unified voices and negotiate. If we're negotiating, another thing, if you look at the structure, there's maybe you could check it out. The structures of MEPs being assigned to each African countries. We have the OACPS, we have the AU. The OACPS of about 70 something, 77 countries, I think. So then we have the African countries, which is the AU, which is which is 54 African countries. But you know something? West Africa, 400 million people don't have a structured parliamentary engagement assigned to West Africa. But we are being grouped under the continental body. Like I keep saying, we all have different priorities. Grouping us under the same continental body would not work. That is why we have the principle of complementarity and subsidiarity. And based on the principle of complementarity and subsidiarity, this would be able to work. If we keep saying, okay, yes, the continental body, African Union, it's not going to work. So if they're coming together to meet with the African Union, there should also be a room for the REC, the regional organization, to talk about West African priority, East African priority, North African priority. Because now we are being grouped under the continental body with different priorities. It's not going to work. So different bodies, different room, different thematic working group to come together, and I think that's the way it's going to work. And understand that they should not always see it with an European lens. They should also be able to see it understand it via an African lens also.
Excellent. And I will move to another topic regarding the global gateway, which is migration. EU officials are more and more talking about migration when trying to justify the funds that are being allocated to Africa, especially. So I wanted to ask you to what extent these funds are addressing the root causes of migration and at which extent are they being used as migration deterrents in a way offering to ally states in Africa compensation for taking some tasks in containment of the migration, or even a repatriation of migrants?
For me, I would always say migration should not be seen as a development project. To be honest, Global Gateway partially address migration, but it does not address the root causes of migration. They reframe migration as a deterrent. They see migration as a development project. Why should migration be seen as a development project? When Europeans talk about migration, about African migrant to Europe, it's seen as an issue. But you know something, the data is telling a different truth. Most Africans and most West African countries will migrate among each other. If you check the data, 3 million people migrate to Europe. 21 million people migrate between Africa. So why should it then be seen as a development project? Why doesn't it work towards looking for a way whereby the people who migrate among ourselves go there to trade, go there as a build the infrastructures, the companies whereby but shouldn't be seen as a means for a development project. And when we're talking about visa discrimination, none of the African countries have free visas to Europe. None of them have free visas to Europe. But in West Africa, that's a regional organization like ECOWAS, we actually have free visas that we can be able to migrate to each other. I was talking about why should it, to me, I don't know, when it comes to migration, it's a really, really sensitive topic. And you now see the EU talking about migration. They had an agreement with Senegal, I think as of 2024, whereby the EU is supposed to give Senegal money in terms of like trying to manage migration, whereby the people don't actually use the sea from Senegal to migrate to the Canary Island. That's really weird. It means that they are using this to actually undermine our regional protocol of the ECOWAS region, which has already been built on. For me, a truly developed Africa would be one when Africans can migrate if they choose to. That is what development should look like. Option to freedom, option to opportunity. Migration is not an economic engine. West African migrants also send remittance back home and also build the economy here in Europe. Now, the political leaders here in Europe now use migration as a means for political campaign. Yes, the citizens don't want migration. If the citizens don't want migration, then that should be a political campaign, which at the end of the day, the data is actually saying something different. It's totally saying something different because fewer Africans, for example, actually migrate to Europe, but more Africans actually migrate between each other. So to me, I don't really like the idea of them putting migration as development. People should have the option to move if they choose to move, not because of not seeing it as a means of development, not seeing it as a means of development. Migration, when it comes to migration, not seeing it as a means for election issue, not seeing it as a means to portray discrimination, because actually right now, migration is also seen as a discrimination against Africans migrating to Europe. Why Europe move freely across Africa, we can't move freely across Europe. So in all honesty, in all genuinely honesty, like Global Gateway, genuinely, yes, the Global Gateway is going to provide jobs and the rest of them, but they should also need to understand that when it comes to providing the job, people think if I come to Europe and I do the same nursing, I earn 2,500 euros. But if I do the same nursing in Africa or something, I earn $300 or 500 euros. It's not mostly the jobs that is causing the migration, is inequalities between both continents. They're like, okay, when I move to Europe, I earn 2,500 or 3,000 or 10,000 if I move to the United States, depending. So I don't know. So Global Gateway does not, yeah, do you get what I'm saying? So it's when it comes to migration, it's quite a sensitive topic. So it shouldn't be seen as an opportunity for development because people should be able to migrate if they choose to migrate, because they also migrate, but nobody uses it as a means for development. Because at the end of the day, this migrant that comes to Europe still help the economy in Europe and still help the economy in Africa. So it's a win-win.
In a moment where, particularly in Europe, populations are growing in age, and they need migrants
Yes.
for keeping the like all the jobs. So I wanted to ask you a last question, this time in regards to the Samoa agreements, which the EU and the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States have signed in 2023. I wanted to ask you what was new in this agreement, and what can you tell us about the negotiation process or the outcomes?
Okay. For the Samoa agreement, well, I wasn't seated in the room when the agreement was signed. Um, you know, this whole Samoa agreement started from somewhere. I'll just give you a little brief of history. The Berlin conferences of European countries coming together to divide Africa. And there is already inequality from that onset. Then we now had some African countries getting their independence in 1960. Then we had the Lume Convention, which actually still failed, which now brought about the Cotonou Agreement, which was a model from 2000 to 2003, which was a trade model, which were like, okay, rather than development aid, it's going to be trade. But at the end of the day, we couldn't compete in the market. We could not just compete in the market because obviously for you to compete, you need to have infrastructures. And right from the colonial period, we never had that infrastructure. It was more like it was an extraction of our raw material that was being sent to Europe. And at the end of the day, we were more of an importing country rather than a manufacturing country. So we saw this and we were like, okay, it's literally not going to work. Okay, another thing again I'm going to say, so there's something that really happened before then, that before the Cotonou Agreement, West Africa was known to be producing textile. Now, this textile business actually failed because when we opened our markets, a lot of European companies came in, largely influx of them. And this textile business, the African manufacturers could not compete. Why they could not compete, difficult for us to it became difficult for the textile business to be able to stay back. Then in the long run, the textile business was transferred to Asia. At the long run, Europe and Africa actually lost. So we saw that we could not compete in the market. And we're like, okay, you know what? Let's go and do the Samoa agreement and let's find solution to this. Whereby, what about the global gateway we're still talking, whereby the global gateway have different sectors that they want to actually invest in Africa. So what has explicitly changed in this is from the Cotonou Agreement, there was conditionality. The conditionality was if you don't respect human rights, if you don't respect democracy, if you don't respect rule of law, no fundings. But in the Samoa Agreement, which was like the OACPS, there was like, okay, there's going to be mutual responsibility among the both of us. We have to respect human rights. We have to respect democracy. We have to respect the rule of law mutually. But there's something, if you don't respect it, you don't get the EU fundings. And it won't send the de-risking signals to investors who have to come to invest in your region. Because for investors who have to come and invest in your region. So, to me, like, I wasn't really in the room when that agreement was signed, but to me, I don't really see anything much that has actually changed in that agreement. I have not really seen anything that has actually changed. The only thing I would say is that there's a bit of progress. It's evolution rather than transformation. I think that was how I would address it. There's evolution. There is still imbalances in power. Like the Europeans still have more power when it comes to the agreement that was signed because there is not the equality in the partnership. The partnership is not still real. There is, like, in the Samoa agreement, like I was telling my former boss, and I was like, oh, sir, why is there not what I was talking about, a structure whereby the regional organizations can be able to liaise directly with the EU, because I asked him and he was like, we have to work together with the continental body. And I still keep saying the continental body cannot address all our priorities. Let's find a way whereby the regional organizations, that's the REC, the regional economic communities, can be able to come in and liaise directly under the same body. So to me, with the Samoa Agreement, the Europeans still have more power in it. There is no still equality, there is no equal partnership. But I would just say that it's evolution. I can see that there's a real progress than what we had in the Cotonou Agreement, than what we even had in the Lomé Agreement. So there is a real progress.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. It was super useful to hear your thoughts. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this talk.